What I'm going to do is something a little bit different today. I know that um, there's already a handful of you out here, and I'm going to go through the week's events, and then we'll go to questions, rather so that way people that are watching this in review can see the weekly events. And if you want to pop something in questions, just be ready for that. Okay. So let's see here. Last Saturday is where we're going to start. Saturday, the 22nd, is now the 29th. Ukraine repelled 53 attacks in Bakhmut on that day. Now, 3 weeks ago or so, when I was doing a live stream, people asked, like, is Bakhmut still going to hold? And they keep creeping forward, but they've been holding. And I've seen literally dozens of reports of Bakhmut's about to fall from RT and Pravda and TASS and those kind of things. Um, and and it still holds. I mean, where there's a will, there's a way. So, all right. Wagner mercenaries return home and terrorize communities. Last Saturday, there was an article about this, and I thought, well, what did you expect was going to happen? You not only had these criminals behind bars, but then you trained the criminals to be extra criminal-like in Ukraine, and now you bring them home and they're doing bad things. Who would have thought that would happen? So, yep, that's what's going on. It's completely expected. Next article was that, or concept was that Russia expels German diplomats in a reciprocal move. Apparently, Germany had, hello, Ozzy, hello, Sage, Lilith, Christian, Nicole. What I'm doing here is I'm going through the week's events, and then I'll deal with your questions directly. So yeah, Russia expels German diplomats. It's a reciprocal move. Berlin had expelled their Russian diplomats just before that. Sunday, the 23rd, Ukraine was crossing the Dnipro River and setting up, and apparently they've been doing this for a little while. Particularly Arthur Ray has been showing how this has been going on. It looks like much ado about nothing, because this is not new. They've been crossing and back and forth in small little units, but something's going to kick off not too long from now, and we'll see when it happens. People, notify me about, did you see this or did you see that? Look, when it happens, we'll all know. So I wouldn't worry about it. But Bakhmut's still holding. But something new has happened, and in the way that Russia does things, I think it's telling. There were 5 missiles that hit Kharkiv, and when Russia starts amplifying these missile strikes, I think it's time to start paying attention, because they're terrorizing the population as an act, as a way of waging war, to try to demoralize the population, as if that's going to work. That's not going to work. And yeah, so at any rate, so that was Sunday. Here's Monday. Romanians crowdfund these Mad Max-like vehicles. I think it's awesome when I see things like that. When the Lithuanians were crowdfunding the Bayraktars, or whatever's going on. Bakhmut still holds. Wagner founders was ordering to kill, not capture on the battlefield. Well, okay. I mean, I don't know how that's a news article. You're supposed to kill. And I guess the idea is that he's being extra tough now, and I'm not sure that he's any extra tough than what he was before. It was kind of not all that useful. Now, as mercenaries, they're not entitled to any necessary provision, as I understand the rules of war, but that doesn't mean Ukrainians aren't still human and wouldn't take them as prisoner and deal with them that way. Anyway, there's a question about what to do with the glut of Ukrainian food in the EU, and this is a real problem. So let me go back a week. You saw this, where Poland and Romanian farmers were talking about, like, hey, look, you're undercutting us, and this was completely accidental. It wasn't intentional. It was a well-intentioned thing that backfires, right? There's unintended consequences in politics. And so the unintended consequences are that it really hurt these farmers, local farmers. So now the new law is that the food can pass through, but it can't stay. And that's good. It can go on to other places or other destinations, and it should go on to other destinations. Another way to solve this is like for the U.S. to purchase this food and then use it in USAID, or another country do something, maybe the EU do something along those lines for diplomatic purposes. But then you got to make sure you don't undercut the local farmers wherever you're sending it. So okay. Um, Ukrainian drone found outside of Moscow. That's good. So the good thing about it is it's actually good that it didn't hit its target location. There was a news article that, oh no, it wasn't a, well, okay. So I was reviewing Scott Ritter again because I like pain. This will be out tomorrow. I took a interview with Scott Ritter and then just reacted to it, and he was talking about the same kind of thing. Like, well, on the anniversary of the invasion, the Ukrainians wanted to hit Moscow, and I can understand that. It's better that they didn't, though, because if they do, then they can lose some of the sympathy of the West. If they don't, and this is just my opinion, and I could be wrong, but if they don't, they're still just 100% the victim. But I like this, that the Ukrainian drone was found outside Moscow, because it didn't have them lose any sympathy with the West, with their partners, but at the same time, it puts Moscow on notice. We can actually reach you, and that causes them to pull back their defenses rather than have it all right on the front lines. So that I think that's optimal. Okay, China walks back comments by the ambassador on Monday as well. Now, so the ambassador says that these former Soviet satellite states are not allowed, or don't have no real legal status as to themselves as their own entities, and that's absolutely just madness. Like that he would say that, but that he would say that, like like he was on his own saying that. That sounds very strange for China. I don't know if China was sending up a balloon, or he was on his own, or just what that was. But yeah, okay. Um, Big news on Monday was Tucker Carlson gone from Fox. And I'm a conservative. I like some of the things that Tucker said, but on Ukraine, he is just was completely 100% wrong. Like Russian propaganda points, like what? Like I can't understand why Tucker was saying some of the things that he was saying, and he was heavily quoted on RT. In fact, after he left RT, and I saw the tweet itself, because I read a dozen or so articles the very next morning, and I think it was in the New York Times that they showed the tweet from RT that had, like, if you want a new job, question more here from RT. That's a bad sign. If RT thinks that you're doing something good, you're not. So that was a big to do. And then that day, I also put out a video, or the next day, I put out a video about, like, why, because I've been trying to process why it's conservatives. It's not really conservatives. Why Republicans are more prone to, at least to the conspiracy theories of that Russia is selling, right? Both sides are prone to some. Okay, so the left is still believing that Ferguson, he really had his hands up and said, "Hands up, don't shoot," when that's completely debunked. There's things on the left and the right that are debunked, but both sides are prone to certain conspiracy theories or ways of like QAnon. I can't, I'm like, QAnon, like, what's going on with you? Like, you're otherwise sensible people that I know that have bought into that. But I traced it back as far as I could, and I could be wrong, and you can watch this video. And it seems like conservatives trust the mainstream media less. Now, I get that, because I'm tired of the mainstream media narrative telling me that I'm a racist when I'm not. So I get that. But then, so they go to alternatives, and alternative, like conservative radio, was a legitimate alternative to a large degree, not necessarily everyone, but then smaller and smaller outfits, and they're more comfortable with these small outfits. They're more comfortable with just somebody on YouTube or something like that, and that can lead you into a very dangerous place, because at least, even if the mainstream news was biased, and I showed you the bias spectrum, all the mainstream, like ABC, NBC, CBS, were all on the leaning left spectrum. at least if that was biased, they at least had journalistic integrity where some other things might not, and that can push you into conspiracy theories more quickly. And I think that's what was going on there with why they're more prone to buy into that kind of thing. I could be wrong, and if I'm wrong, tell me I'm wrong. That's okay. All right. So, yeah. So, we talked about Tucker Carlson being gone from Fox, how Russian front lines were shaping up in a counteroffensive. It looks like they're digging in. It looks like but it also looks like the Ukrainians are being equipped. Tuesday, big stuff. Russians and Wagner mercenaries. By the way, I know there's now 50 of you here. Um, what I'm doing is something a little bit different. So I'm going to go through the events and then I'll answer your questions. So, and when we get to the questions, if you could talk to me instead of crosstalk at each other so that I can answer questions for everybody, I'd appreciate that. And that would be just a more efficient way of being able to answer as much for you and get as much for you as possible. And I appreciate that. In the meantime, feel free to make whatever comments you want here. Um, okay, so Tuesday, Russians and Wagner mercenaries shoot at each other. That was quite an article to read. Yeah, there was bad blood, and they didn't quite know what was. Yeah, it was it was a fun article to read. Lavrov denounces the U.S. and the rules-based order being at odds with the UN Charter, which is an utter and complete lie. It was such a lie that I had to do a video about that, and I did. And so what he was trying to get the world to believe was that the UN Charter says this, and that the U.S. and the West is subverting this by being hegemonic and not allowing these other countries to have their way too. Well, their way would mean things like invading Ukraine. That's actually overthrowing the UN order and the whole point of the UN. And other people on the UN Security Council wouldn't have it. They talked about it, but that doesn't mean that it didn't play in Russia, and they got their propaganda value out of it. Bakhmut still holds. Investigative report says that Putin decided to invade Ukraine in 2021, and I was about to do a video about this. It looks like when Medvedchuk had some assets seized, that's when Putin crossed the mental Rubicon and decided that he was going to invade. Oh, Starsky's in the thread. Starsky, thank you so much for spending the time with us and doing the interview. My viewers absolutely loved your interview and couldn't say enough good things about you. So thank you for doing that. Okay, so Bakhmut still holds that investigative report that Putin decided to invade in 2021. And he got no pushback, no real like, yeah, don't do this. He got from the West, but he didn't get, if you do this, X is going to happen to you and it will be really bad. So he was not persuaded that the West had the will in order to stop and to really stop him from doing it. He thought he was going to get his hand slapped, or maybe what happened in 2014, and it turned out not to work out so well. DeSantis urged a ceasefire in Ukraine. It was kind of a very tepid kind of thing. It's unfortunate that he keeps waffling, and I'm going to keep an eye on that. Majority of the world now disapproves of Russia's leadership for the first time, another article said, and that was interesting to see. Okay, Wednesday, Russian businessman slams Putin in a leaked call. Businessmen, and so you see the oligarchs are not happy with what's happening because it's really crimping their business. It's hurting what they're doing. I don't think that the population of Russia, the serfs, I don't think the people will rise up. I just don't. I think they're so beat down. Um, I just can't see that. But I think the businessmen, those are the next tier down from Putin. The people that he relies on. That's where the action is. If you were trying to disrupt things, that's where you'd have to look. China sends an envoy to broker peace. Remember that terrible thing that the Chinese ambassador said before that about how Ukraine and other former Soviet satellites didn't have a place, or didn't really have a reason to be claiming legal status. They're trying to smooth that over. And so President Xi even called Zelensky, or talked to Zelensky. I don't know who called who. Yeah, so Xi and Zelensky talked. And I did a video about this yesterday. So when they talked, it was some interesting stuff. They talked for an hour. She said something like, "I'm not going to add any fuel to the fire," which seems like neutrality, where that's a really good thing. If China can just be neutral, that's a really good thing. If they weigh in on Russia's side, and it looked like they were going to weigh in on Russia's side with some weapons that they were going to try to disguise. That's part of the Pentagon leak, and it turns out, as far as we know, they did not. They were going to be providing some humanitarian aid and other, but if they just stay on the sideline, they can watch Russia continue to destroy themselves as they become the big brother. And I think that they know that. So their position, from my um, outsider's view, I think they're positioning themselves to profit or do better by whichever side wins. So they're not a friend. It's like Erdogan when he brokered the grain deal. He's not a friend of Ukraine, but he's not a friend of Russia. He's a friend of himself and Turkey, and I think China is in very much the same mold. Prigozhin accuses the Russian military of treason for not providing ammunition. I absolutely love to watch the infighting between Prigozhin and the Russian military. It's absolutely fascinating. It's not just fascinating, but it's somewhat enjoyable to recognize that the infighting at the top is going to cost them. I'm trying to calculate. Does that cost them a company, a brigade, a battalion? How much more inefficient are they just because of that than if they were united thinking through the same thing? It's almost like the effect of a lack of effective combat arms, like Air Force and tanks and infantry all working together, effective combined arms. It takes that kind of effect away. Same thing with the infighting. It takes that kind of effect away. Okay, Thursday, forced deportation of children is genocide, says the Council of Europe. Russian textbooks delete Kyiv. They're the Russian textbooks, the little bits that we're seeing of their text. I mean, like the Russians came in as liberators to, this is what school children are being taught in the occupied areas and that kind of thing. And there was more talk about Xi's call with Zelensky. Okay, and then finally Friday, this was yesterday. Lithuania is telling like, be careful with China. Like Lithuania and all the Baltic states understand the stakes here, right? And so they're in Ukraine's corner in a big way. And I was listening to Silicon Curtain, by the way, this morning, and the power is going to shift in Europe, I think, because of the war. So the Baltic states and Poland and Ukraine make a formidable bloc, BLOC, to counterbalance. So it used to be France and Germany were the like kind of the big, and England to, or Britain to some degree would have had, and Britain left. So France and Germany are kind of like the big players, but not so much anymore if you can have a block of the Baltics and Poland. And I think the Europeans actually do understand that the power is going to shift in some meaningful way in the EU when the war is over. So at any rate, the Baltic states were all behind him, but they invited Lithuania invited Taiwan to have a de facto embassy in Lithuania, and that really ticked off the Chinese, and so they were at each other. But Lithuanians were saying, just be careful with China. So Putin targets political opponents with new laws, and I really didn't get much into that, so I can't speak to it so much. There is new Russian terror campaigns of bombing civilian buildings. Starsky, if he's still here, can probably tell you more about that because he did a whole video about that yesterday. And Anna from Ukraine was talking about this in hers yesterday. Just, I mean, you could just see on her face how distraught this would make you feel. Like, imagine if you're in a building and you're like, you know what? If it hits me, I'm dead. I mean, like, how would you? I mean, just processing that. Like, where do I go? Like, I'm just if it comes, it comes, and having to endure that time over time is just bizarrely difficult. Okay, so what I'm going to do is shift gears because that brings me through now. And last one is that Wagner was plotting to spark violence in Moldova. There was an interesting article about that as well, and yes, the whole mentality that Putin has brought to this has been to move forward and try to take as much ground as he can. And the Silicon Curtain. By the way, I'm going to be interviewing hopefully next week John. Fink, is it? I mean, the guy from Silicon Curtain. I'm going to be interviewing him about what his insights are about, with all the interviews he's done, like what have been the big aha moments, and that should be really, really interesting. But yeah, Wagner clearly was in Moldova trying to conquer. And the reason that I brought that back up is that his guest yesterday, in the most recent video, was talking about how like Putin's calculus, his calculus for how he's going to act. It's like he doesn't look at the cost. He only looks at the benefit. And that's a really insightful understanding of how he's thinking about this. Like you can't like think about him like we would think in the West of like he will act rationally. He just has to be beaten. It just comes down to that. Okay, so I'm going to answer your questions. I'm going to go back a little bit and see if I can find some questions that are here because you're kind of talking at each other a bit. So I'm going to just look through some things and see if there's any questions to me. And then so try to direct these to me at this point, and we'll see how this works. McGabber says, do you think Western support for Ukraine would wane over time should the much awaited offensive fail? That's a legit possibility. I would hope not. So the support has remained so strong because Ukrainians have proved themselves so well. I mean, they've really comported themselves very well and have done a lot with the little that they had. Now, I understand from a NATO report that said 98% of the promised vehicles are now on the ground or something along those lines. So they should be getting the stuff to be ready for the fight. So the fight's coming up. They've got to do something with it. But it is possible that that could happen. So there's a real possibility. Okay, Ozzy Boga says, by the way, Ozzy, I gave you credit for that surf versus Cossack line when I was talking him to Operator Starsky in that interview. So you've perpetually gotten credit for me for that. That was such a great line. The best antidote to totalitarianism is to have lived under it. Hence the Baltic and Poles' reaction. Still baffled by the Magyars, though they forget 56. That's right. And so it's interesting. Even in America, everyone that I know that is have lived in a former communist state, Romania or Bulgaria or Lithuania or whoever I know like that, they have to a man been like, no, that has to stop. What's going on there? We know what's coming next. Okay, let's see what other questions you have here. Prometheus, he gives more insight to. He could give more insight to your English-speaking audience in understanding the war. I guess we're talking about Starsky with that. Yeah, I mean, Starsky's interview was absolutely great. I mean, just the mentality. And I kind of understood it and I kind of didn't. Like every Ukrainian I've ever met was like deeply proud to be Ukrainian, and I couldn't understand why. And I get it now. Like I just didn't know enough about the culture until February 24th when that hit. Like everybody, the world started paying attention. And one of the last questions I asked, like, look, the shirt I'm wearing, my daughter gave me this as a present. And we're with you. We want you. We want to support you. We see that you are willing to stand up and like think about how the Vietnam was terribly difficult for the U.S. because the Vietnamese, like the South Vietnamese, didn't want to stand up for themselves. To look at Afghanistan and how hard it was to train the Afghanis to stand up for themselves, and they didn't really want to do it. The Ukrainians want to. They're like, give me the stuff so we can do it. There's a very different mentality, and Starsky pulled out the mentality very well, and I really appreciate that. That was eye-opening. I kind of got it, but he confirmed it for me. Let's see. Christian says, what amazing excuses do you think Russia will come out with when they start losing territory in Ukraine during the counteroffensive? I think the first thing that they're going to do is not excuse, but saber rattle and say that, well, we have nuclear weapons and that kind of thing. They can't use nuclear weapons or they become North Korea. And they know that. They're not stupid, but they know that. Goodwill gestures, of course, said Johnny Johns. Well played. Ukraine won't lose the fight. The USA has helped way too much to allow them to use. Now, it's not just the USA. Um, Europe has increasingly, like collectively, Europe has balanced as much or almost as much or something along those lines, and that by Europe doing that, that takes the steam out of those that would say, well, Europe needs to do more. Europe, do more, right? We need you to do more, but that takes kind of the air out of that balloon when people are using that as an excuse for lacking support. What will happen? Eagle Mob says, what will happen to Russia after Ukraine wins? Shall we trust them ever again? What's your opinion? I don't think a leopard changes its spots, but I am comforted by what happened after World War II in Germany and Japan, where being defeated caused a having to change administration and the way that they do things, to the point that Germany is so pacifist now. And I get that Germany's pacifist, and I want them to not start another world war, right? So but they were this way because um of things implemented after World War II. In fact, the high road to high command in the German army is through the bureaucracy now, if I understand it correctly. And that's different than through the combat arms, which is what's required in the U.S. military, for example. Should we trust them? If we can actually make the changes. But if it's just a replacement of Putin with something else, you might be trading the devil for the devil you don't know. And so just Putin leaving the stage is not enough, because the mentality is still there, the Tsarist mentality, the Soviet dominating mentality. There's something culturally that allows them to just destroy their fellow man without feeling like it's almost like this is the wrong term, but it's almost like it's sociopath or a psychopath in the way that they feel no guilt or remorse. It's not applied correctly, but it's essentially the same kind of thing, and it's very sad to see. Like so until that changes, no, they shouldn't be let back into the family of nations until they make reparations to Ukraine for the terrible things that they've done. Until like in Germany, so I'm all for free speech, and I wouldn't actually advocate this, but I get why Germany does this. Like, it's a crime to deny the Holocaust, and yeah, I understand. Like they don't want to ever go back to that. Okay, big fish fishing SA. Hypothetically, if Ukraine looks like getting defeated, what happens then? No one talks about this. I'm sure it's not the best time. What are my thoughts about this? I can't see a scenario where that can happen. And I'm not just being optimistic, but remember, you have an entire nation. Go back to the Starsky interview if you did not watch it. Like, grandpa with a shotgun, like you're not going to subdue a nation with the number of troops that they have. Like, they could subdue this little section and perhaps stay in that section. I'm more worried about not being able to actually take some territory back right now than I am about Russia being able to roll over it. There's no scenario in my mind where Russia can subdue the entire nation of Ukraine, because it's all the civilians are opposed to them as well, and you can't. You have to have a multiple. I can't remember what this multiple is, and I looked it up once upon a time. But like when the U.S. Army was occupying Germany after World War II, you have to have a certain number of soldiers to population, and that's if the population is okay with you being there. Like, they're okay. Okay, we've been defeated. They get it. But if they're rising up against you, it has to be a much higher number, and they just don't have the manpower to do it. So I can't see that scenario. And again, this is not just false optimism. They couldn't take the entire country, in my mind. They've gotten away with hundreds of years for whatever. Okay, what do you think Putin will try to do? To try to keep his power? He'll do everything he can to try to keep his power, because he's trying to maintain his name. He wants to be Vladimir Putin the Great, like Peter the Great or Catherine the Great. I'm not saying that like he really wants a title, but he wants to go down in history as having done this, whatever the great thing is. And it really backfired on him in a spectacular way. So he'll draw out the war as long as possible. He will partner with the worst elements on earth in order to do it, as he does with. He'll get stuff from North Korea and Iran and whatever he'll try to form his coalition economically in order to sustain. He will grind his own population down. I mean, he'll so the what we saw last week was the um, quiet, informal, behind the scenes electronic recruitment efforts, that so it doesn't scare the population. It's not going to spook anyone if you have you get a recruitment thing on your phone. Oh, by the way, that's what's on my phone. Um, yeah, I like that. So when you get a notice on your phone to come to the recruiting station, so this is a soft mobilization that will continue, and he will have no compunction about using up as many Russians as possible, as necessary in order to fulfill his goals. Because it's about him. He's an authoritarian dictator who's going to use and objectify his people for his ends. And whether he thinks he thinks he's right. This is a good thing. This is a not moral thing, but a right thing to do for Russia, and it will add to Russia and its glory and whatever else. So he just needs to be defeated. Um, let's see, what's the next question? Steve Osborne, I do appreciate that most of us here on the pro-Ukrainian, but what do you think? We're getting stuck in our own political bubble. Steve, that's a fascinating question. The trick is it's hard to read the right side clearly. I'm sorry. So we read our side and we think, okay, I hear this, I hear this, I hear this, I hear this from these cast of characters, like the pro-Ukrainian YouTubers. I go beyond that. I'm trying to read multiple sources, not just US press, but European press and other presses around the world, where I can find things that will shed insight. But the trick is, on the other side, they lie so much. There's nothing I can really depend on, because the way that they are doing this is trying to intentionally lie about things constantly. So it's hard to really see what's going on. You'll see on the ground what happens. You'll see in the fighting what happens. You'll see as the land changes hands. But you're right. You can get stuck in your own bubble, just like the Russians are stuck in their bubble because they can't get out and see the other thing. Like, they would have an easier time than we do, because they could at least see truth in what we're trying. Even if we get it imperfectly or do it wrong, we're at least trying to get the truth. There's not truth on the other side. There's intentional spinning of things to the point where it's so opaque, it's hard to see. But you need to try to triangulate, and you need to not give your own position. And this is true with anything, not just with the war in Russia, but not give your own position a pass because you like what you hear. When you find something that is potentially within legitimate sources, potentially against your position, chase that down and try to confirm whether that's going on. So, for example, the reports and the leaks, like, there are some things in the leaks that weren't pretty, but you got to let's assume that, take it with a grain of salt, but let's assume that this is what's going on. So how we're dealing with other countries, for example, that wasn't pretty, wasn't a good look. Or the ratio is 7-1. Is that it? So I'm chasing that down, trying to prove it, but everything I know from other sources are showing me that that's not the case, and so I'm trying to triangulate on what's true. Turns out 7-1 is ridiculous, right? But that made me go, okay, let me see how I can prove what is right and triangulate on it. So, but that's a great question. Just don't look for confirming your own position. Look to see, like Jordan Peterson talks about this, where, like, you're standing on a post. Your job is to try to kick out that post from beneath you. If you can kick it out, then you know that it wasn't true. If you can't kick it out, and I don't just mean by reading one other source, but if you can't kick it out after you triangulate, then you know that you had something to stand on. Then you go on to the next post and you do the same thing. And that's how you can kind of tell whether something's true. But that's an absolutely great question. Okay. Lilith, how can we ever forgive them for what they did to the Ukrainian people? Wow. And that's going to be hard. I'm sitting in the high seats because I'm in the United States, right? If I was in Ukraine and they were doing this to my family, I would have a much harder time saying what I'm about to say. But like, it can be done, and I don't know that you can do it in a natural. I'm a Christian, and I would say like God can give you the power to forgive, but in a natural, it would be an incredibly hard thing. But I think of people like Corey Ten Boom and The Hiding Place. You look up the book The Hiding Place. It was what the Germans did to her family, killed her dad and her sister, and in the concentration camps, and she learned to try to forgive. Like that was her. But again, it's a brutally hard thing. I think this is the kind of thing that they're going to have to address after the war. Right now, they have to worry about surviving. Like literally, right now, they have to worry about surviving, because that next missile could hit their apartment building. So I'm less likely to worry about that right now. But I don't know that you can forgive in a natural without supernatural ability to forgive such a dehumanizing, mean, terrible thing that the Russians are doing to the Ukrainians. So, and I can see the anger and agony of Ukraine's face. Like like it's gotten a lot worse in recent days. And I'm not talking bad about her. I'm just saying I can see like the toll that it's having, and it's really saddening to watch. Um, okay. They've gotten away with it for hundreds of years. I hope we can stop it now. Yeah, and that's exactly right. If you declare peace right now, you're just letting them go back and rearm and mass produce more weapons so they can come back and do it later on. Richard, what do you think Putin will do to keep his power? We already talked about that one. Speaking of Japanese in World War II, many Japanese Americans, like my grandparents, struggled for years with their counterparts across the Pacific for decades because of World War II. Well, that's really interesting. I'd never considered that dynamic before. Okay. Rio Orion. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. What is your view on the national policy of the OUNB toward Poles, Jews, and Russians? This is an organization headed by today's hero of Ukraine, Stefan Bandera. Policy of the Okay, I don't know what the policy of the OUNB toward Poles, Jews, and I don't know what that is. But let me speak to Stefan Bandera. So I can't speak to that particular policy. Stefan Bandera is hailed as a hero in Ukraine, to my understanding, because he was a nationalist fighting for Ukrainian identity. He collaborated with the Nazis and ultimately was jailed by the Nazis. And then, but when the Nazis turned on Russia and the Soviet Union, the very next day he wrote a letter to Hitler asking for Ukrainian independence, and having had worked with the Nazis. And so the Russians use that to see he's a Nazi. Actually, the Nazis didn't really appreciate or like him or work with him, or like he was working with them, but they weren't necessarily with him. What I understand about Bandera is he was all about the nationalist cause. Let me translate that into American speak. Lincoln said, if I could end this war and not free a single slave, I would end this war not free a single slave. If I could end this war by freeing the slaves, I would end this war by freeing the slaves. He was a American nationalist, if I can just use that broadly, right? His goal was unity of the United States. It was not about the other thing. And I think there's a comparison there, and a legitimate comparison, between how we honored Lincoln for like he ultimately did free the slaves, but it wasn't like that wasn't his goal. Was to keep the Union together. And same kind of thing here. His Bandera's goal was national unity, or the nation of Ukraine. We tend to honor our heroes for the thing that they did that we honor, not for all the other warts that they had. And every human is a sinful human being who has warts. Like we all do, everyone. Some do great things, but we all have warts. So I don't know if that helps answer your question. Collaborating with Nazis, probably not a good thing. But what's your other choice here when you just had the Holodomor, where Stalin has essentially murdered by starvation millions of your people. So working with him's not cool. Working with him's not. Maybe the other devils. I mean, I guess that's what his calculation was. Okay, Mats Larson says Silicon Curtain today. Cure Giles explaining that Russia is a place in time where other countries were. Yeah, that's the one I was talking about. Where a few hundred years ago, when it was okay to expand countries by invading our neighbors. It was a great interview. I would highly recommend going over to Silicon Curtain and listening to that interview. And as I said, I'm going to be talking to Jonathan hopefully next week. Big Fish Fishing SA, thank you. I'm Australian, but my bloodline is Lithuanian, Ukrainian. I just worry every day about this war. Like, there's a lot of us that just worry about it. I'm none of those things. I'm not Ukrainian at all, but my principles demand my attention here, and that I do whatever I can to help this. So Dennis Davdov, Nathan Shale says, Dennis Davdov mentioned a similar mobilization method to Russia being discussed in Ukraine's parliament. Yeah, this was last week in Ukraine's parliament. They rammed it through the Duma and they rammed it through the upper chamber, and then Putin signed it. And that's what I was talking about. Yeah. Old Foggy said, when this is over, how do you change the hearts and minds of Russian people? I think that's actually going to be easier. So that's a great question. My first thought is, so Japan was a little different than Germany. Germany was defeated, and there were still some grumbling, like within generations, like Hitler was right. And you see this kind of thing with the Soviets, like with the turning to Russia, and we missed the Soviet days. You didn't see that kind of thing in Japan. And as soon as the emperor said, no, we're listening to MacArthur, Japan shifted very quickly. I think being used to being directed, the proper direction from the top would redirect them in a shorter order than the way that the Soviet Union collapsed. And if they could accomplish that, then the next task is to get them to start thinking for themselves and working through, like, look, I got to take this responsibility and leadership and work up. I was in Lithuania in 2001, and then again a couple of times after that. And now 2001's only a decade after Lithuania had broken away from the Soviet Union. And I would hear things that were just discordant to me as an American. They would say things like, well, we just need one good leader to lead us. And as an American, I'm like, no, that's not it at all. That's no, like, I don't even like the guy in charge of our country. Like you have to have levels of leadership all the way up, right? So, but the mentality was so different. And there was a very kind of beat down mentality. It's somewhat optimistic compared to the rest of the neighborhood in former Soviet Union, but still kind of beat down, and they were just kind of coming out of it. We called it, maybe, I hope this doesn't offend anyone, we called it the Soviet hangover, because it's just like it was like they were coming out of a fog of what they had lived through. And I think that's going to be kind of the other side of this. Okay, at any rate, I think it depends on how it's done, whether it will change the hearts and minds or not, because of how it ends. And that's going to be important to my mind. I could be wrong, but that's what I think. Cheryl Waitley said confirmation bias. That's what I was talking about before, where I was saying, like, don't look to confirm your own position. Like, you believe that X number of Russians are killed. Let me look to confirm that. Look to disconfirm it. And then when you're looking to disconfirm it, examine the sources, and if credible sources are doing it, then you have to start to really work through, like, where's the truth here. Ozzy said Prigozhin himself said he is losing 5-1 in Bakhmut. That's right. And I can't imagine that. Okay, so let's take that as an example. So if you have people that have never had real military training, and I'm speaking from the high seats as well. I don't have a military background. I had 2 years in the Army ROTC, and then President Clinton killed our program as part of the peace dividend. So I have, like, no real military experience to speak of. But if you have people that didn't even have that, like, had a couple of weeks of, do something, and then they're thrown right into the front lines. I can't imagine that they're going to be effective fighters, as opposed to the Ukrainian army that's on the other side that has been preparing for this mentally since 2014 because they realized, like, hey, more is coming down the line. So 5-1 seems rational to my mind in that front. Now, against the former Wagner mercenaries, just them, not the jailbirds, I would think that that's a little high. Like, these guys were professional military who contracted with Wagner, and they have had a pretty good reputation. But that's not who is losing 5-1. It's the inmates. So I would think it would be more like 1-1, 1-2, 2-1, something along those lines, if it was the actual normal Wagner before that. So you have to like think through the scenarios. Mish Ashdown says, can't forgive while they continue what they're doing. I understand, and I'm not gonna press you. And I don't think that you can forgive in the natural. I think you really need God's help to allow you to be able to do that, because it's such a wanton violation of your humanity, of your dignity. I mean, like, so I'm not like arguing like you should forgive. I get it. I understand, and I think you need God's help to forgive. Cheryl says behavior has to change for this forgiveness to come, and some narcissists fake behavior change and bide their time. That's right. Behavior has to change. It does. It really does. Nathan, sales increasingly difficult to motivate men, but I know that there are still people waiting who don't want to join the war but are ready for to fulfill their duty. I'm not sure what you're asking, from the Russian side or the Ukrainian side, or just what. Johnny Johns, or just skipped on me here. Johnny John says, great point about Stefan Bandera. There's nothing wrong with nationalism so long as it doesn't turn into something like Nazism. Yeah, I'm not excusing that. I'm saying he used that in order to, his prime goal was Ukrainian nationalism, which again is just in and of itself is enough of a slight to the Russians, because how can you not be part of the Russian Empire or the Ruski Mir or whatever? And Ukrainian nationalism is such an affront to the Russians. It's just fascinating to watch. Okay, Matt's from says, as an American, do you feel that you've been unfairly judged by some countries in this conflict? To me, it seems like you're not getting the recognition you deserve for all the U.S. has done for UA and Europe. I don't care. I mean, it doesn't matter. I mean, people all the time tell me, well, you're as an American, you can't, blah, blah, blah. So what? I mean, why does that opinion matter to me? The U.S. has done a lot. And, what I don't like is when they say stupid stuff like the U.S. should stay out of it or mind its own business. I mean, like somebody in Europe or whatever, like, we didn't want to come to World War I or want to come to World War II, right? Like, it's not like we want to, but as I've explained to other people that are asking about this, like, if you don't do this now, what's the alternative? If you don't, like, you want to be the world leader in trade and projecting freedom and things around but this is the cost for having a leadership position there. Like, if you're, let's say, a leadership position in trade, right? If you want the benefits of this trade, you have to pay the cost. So this is the cost of doing business, is to be able to support people like this when the international order is so violated that you can't let that violation go. Otherwise, the violator will continue to violate and violate and violate. That's what it would have. I studied Hitler and the Nazis in my master's thesis in public policy. I have an MBA and a master's in public policy, and my PhD is in org leadership. And in there, I studied the American founders. So in my master's in public policy, I studied the Nazis and the Third Reich, and Hitler said that he would have stopped if he was checked at the Sudetenland. Like, if in his first attempt to do this, if he was checked, he would have stopped. Like, that is absolutely mind-blowing, and only in hindsight can you look back at that and go, this would have been a good idea. So here, let's keep Putin from expanding and being worse. Okay. Cheryl says, Dr. Gerdes, what do you think Republican senators and congressmen what do you think of Republican senators and congressmen making a statement that victory in Ukraine will be the goal? Do you know about this? The Hodges effect. Um, I don't know who's been saying what, if that's what you're asking. I think they should be saying that as opposed to degrading Russia, if that's what you're saying. And they should be defining it as pushing every Russian out of the border, right? As Zelensky has done. Somebody said this the other day too, like, I think it was Peter Gerdes, no relation to me, by the way. If when you see Peter on there, I mean, there's not a lot of Gerdeses running around, but yeah. And Peter was saying, well, he's negotiating. He might not get Crimea back. I said, what Zelensky should be doing is negotiating for a buffer zone from Russia. Like, here's 100 miles uninhabited around our border. Yeah, that's what he should be negotiating for. And then if you don't get that, you don't get that. But right now, every time you hear about negotiation, it's always like, well, what will Russia get? Russia should get nothing. They should actually lose something in a huge way. So anyway, that's just my take on that. Sonny, wow, Starsky is here, Prof. You're at the top of your game now. That was great for Starsky to be willing to do that interview. He's actually kind of a hero of mine. I was really excited about that interview. I've watched, like, I think every video. I might have missed one. Every one of his, like, regular videos. Well, I missed two now because I didn't actually watch all of yesterday's, what he was doing. I watched a little bit of it. Flatermouse, hello. I just wanted to say that I really appreciate your contact. I am rather left, out of Europe, German, but I do think that conservatives and progressives should and must work together. Exactly. Look, anybody that agrees with you on the same thing, make common cause with them. Like, we don't have to, like, see the same thing about tax credits, right? Don't worry about that. If you support Ukraine, you're in the right place. Like, if that's what you want to do. Now, you'll also hear a different perspective than you would hear from somebody else that's exactly like you, and that builds dendrites in your brain and helps you understand the framework of how you should think about this more broadly. So yeah, absolutely. Come on. That's exactly right. I don't care. I mean, if you could be a purple dinosaur for all I care, come and be here if you support Ukraine. Hello, I just wanted to say, yeah, we already got that one. Merrily 8, that is the past. What do you think is do you feel it is in the pertinent now? I don't understand that question. Flair Mouse says, the current crisis in democracy and Ukraine war made this absolutely abundantly clear, in my opinion. Keep up the good work and cheers on. I work on, cheers. Ronnie M says, how to change Russia. A big fence and lock the gate. Give them loads of psych meds and etc. Doctors, leave them for a few years. Hope they wake up. I don't think that's going to work, but there's just something in a culture. It's like, it's a analogy. It's kind of like the Bushido culture in Japan, that the warlike culture in there. Bushido actually, I think, means way of the warrior, and that culture, they really had to work that out of the system. Why Ukraine? Hello, why Ukraine? Professor, please read my question in response to your YouTube community post. Thanks. I know a lot of NGOs in here are struggling with this. If you can't find a question, thanks. I'm not sure what the question is, and I try to read all the questions. I have, to my knowledge, read every question. That's becoming increasingly harder, which is great. I like that. That's a harder thing. But I sometimes am reading, like, at the supermarket or something, or I just didn't get a chance to respond, or sometimes I just don't respond because I'm not sure that I can add any extra value. But please, why Ukraine? Tell me what the question is again, or put it in here. If I can help you, I'll try to help you. Okay, Mitch Ashdown, should or can more be done to enable Ukraine in occupied territories fight? I mean, other than training and equipping, and that's what we need to do. When I was talking to Starsky, I mean, they need more vehicles, they need more drones. If you have a heart for this and you want to give. Like, I mean, please do. I mean, like, if they need drones, get them drones. Michael Spain, Russia is never going to stop or fully withdraw. So how does Ukraine win, and how much American treasure should we willing to commit? 250, 1 trillion, 5 trillion. What's your stop limit? Okay, Michael. So your daughter is in a car wreck. How much are you willing to spend on her medical attention? I mean, is it 1,000, 2,000? Or you're going to stop at 5, right? So it's kind of like that, where look, you didn't ask for this fight, but the fight came to you, and now you have to deal with what that is. And for the Americans who are thinking, "Oh, this is too costly," it's not even your blood. Like, like stop talking about how it's too costly. It's costly for Ukrainians. That's where it's costly. Um, give. I mean, this is it. Then again, the alternative is far worse. If you don't, and it becomes World War III, it becomes worse because Putin keeps going onto Moldova, which is what he was planning to do, on the other side of capturing Odessa, which he never got to, right? Jake Grushliski Haburn says, haha, I thought about advertising Silicon Curtain YouTube channel, but Mats Larson already done it. They explained how wrong it was. Westerners' understanding of Russia. Greetings to Operator Starsky. Yeah, I mean, so it was a great video, that Silicon Curtain episode. Sunky FH, Europe will have no limit. We are going to end with Ukraine. And Europe, you can't afford not to. I don't think, look, for the United States, if you are leading, there's a burden in leadership. We like to think, now that I'm back to my strengths area, we like to think of leadership as all the positive things, right? But there's actually a lot of negatives to leadership as well. Like, your time is not your own. In this case, our treasure, we have to spend on this because this is part of the burden of leading. And so if you like the perks, you got to pay this. Okay. Johnny John's cotton cutie has been lately in Crimea. Paul Young says, no matter how good the soldier, a drone drop shows no prejudice. Old Foggy says, please request hitting the like button. Oh, yeah. If you could hit the like button, that would help this video spread some. And thank you, Old Foggy. Request hitting the like button, have the algorithm spread it further. Anytime that you turn on one of these videos, if you want to help YouTube spread it, like, hit like, leave a comment, even if it's like, thanks, or, well done. If you just put an exclamation mark, great, that's still a comment, and that kind of thing. So if you could hit the like button, I'd really appreciate it. I know there's 100+ of you out here, and there's 68 likes. So if you don't like me, that's okay. I'm not hurt or anything, but if you could spread that, I'd appreciate that. Michael Spain, Gary Chilmick, what does that Kilmick, what does that mean? Should we spend into insolvency? Maybe sell off Hawaii and Alaska? Money and resources are not unlimited, but nobody will provide a limit to it. Yeah, you just can't really set a limit. 72. All right, we're moving up. Prometheus USA says, greetings from Ukraine. Unfortunately, even now there are signs that specialists in the USA have a poor understanding of the war. Let me remind you that the same people that said Ukraine would lose quickly, that's right. I mean, they did get it wrong. I advise you to invite a Ukrainian military analyst, Mykola Belivsky. He speaks English fluently. Prometheus, if you can help me get in touch with Mykola Beliskov, I would love to talk to him and just get that perspective. So if you can do that, I would love to talk to him. 77, we're moving up on the likes. Old Foggy, what was the stop limit of World War II? Great question, Old Foggy. Russia should lose access to the Black Sea. Yeah, that would be quite a punishment for that. I spend way too much time thinking through this kind of thing, but I was thinking, can you imagine how Russia would go absolutely crazy if, and they're not doing this, nobody's talking about this, and nobody's even suggesting this. I'm just saying, like, if Zelensky announced, by the way, we're providing the U.S. a base in Odessa. Like, I'm not saying he should do it, but just imagine how crazy. But that's what what Ukraine feels with Russia being in Sevastopol. So, um, yeah, so the Black Sea, losing the Black Sea might be a great consequence of this. Okay, Chuck Yamers, I think there's a fine line between isolationism and pulling back to lick wounds from the world policing like Afghanistan. It shouldn't stop the U.S. from helping Ukraine. Yes, I'm not saying I want to be the world policeman. I do know that I don't want Russia or China to be the world's policeman because that could go very bad. And I'm not trying to be involved in everything, right? I don't want like, so people would say like Sudan's back in crisis now, right? And when there was the Sudan crisis, people, well, why isn't the U.S. doing something about Sudan? Well, that's not about to kick off. It's terrible what was going on in Sudan, right? It was absolutely, but that wasn't going to kick off World War III potentially if it was mishandled, and that's part of the big difference here as well. Cheryl Waitley, hold on a second. Wow, I'm behind. Man, I'm behind. Okay. Cheryl Waitley called bipartisan Ukraine victory resolution. I'm not familiar with it, but now I need to look it up. Aussie Mocha says, even if Ukraine pushes all Russian forces out, what will stop Putin from continuing to send in missiles and continue terrorism in Ukraine? Okay, so even if he pulls out, what will happen after that? Like if he's just going, well, I'm just going to continue to bomb you from elsewhere, because he's never going to rejoin the rest of the world after that, and that becomes a whole different problem set. But that's a problem set I would look forward to, of like at least get him off the territory first. Fox Sparrow, isn't there a similarity between Iraq and Ukraine? The U.S. didn't go to Iraq to seize territory. Yeah, there is a big difference. Like, yes, there is a difference, but the primary difference to my mind is that Ukraine actually wants to fight. Like they're willing to fight. They're just saying, give us the weapons, we'll do it. And because of that, let them do, like if they want to defend themselves. And there's a moral right, like just go to the understanding of just war theory. There's a moral right to defend yourself. Okay, you have a right. Like if somebody breaks into my home, intending to do my children or my wife harm, I'm gonna fight them like a banshee. Every lick of martial arts training that I've had over the last 20 years is gonna come out, right? Okay. Cheers from Italy. Yes, Bushido means way of the warrior. Do you think we should have help UA with boots on the ground? To the degree that we could avoid that, it's probably better to avoid that, because that could more easily trigger World War III. Again, we're trying to deal with World War III. So we're running that fine line here. We failed earlier by not dissuading Putin, and I wish we could have done it then. That would be the optimal place to keep this from happening, and then we would never be having this conversation, right? This being said, the next optimal place is to try to arm the Ukrainians to do what they need to be able to doing. Sending in NATO troops then becomes a whole different problem set and could make things go very wrong very quickly. Why Ukraine said, why aren't ordinary Americans donating to the hundreds of small NGOs, volunteers, and combat groups operating in Ukraine the way Europeans are? Americans are donating to various causes. From my very first video, I had Samaritan's Purse linked below, and if you want to donate, Samaritan's Purse has always been there. I added United 24 to that, and there are others as well. Somebody mentioned to me the other day of the idea of crowdsourcing, and do you think this is a good idea? Crowdsourcing a list of charities, like legitimate charities, but I don't have the expertise. I need to find somebody that has some expertise to help me strain that list so that people can donate to the causes that they want to donate to, and I think that's a great idea. They are donating. I don't know that they're donating to the same degree or the same amount, but again, they also a lot of them feel like, well, I'm donating against my will by giving, through the government, but we are donating. Fledermouse says, Professor Gerdes, what do you think about the Chinese policy in regard to Russia and Europe ATM? In my opinion, Xi and the Chinese Minister of Defense visit made it clear that they engage in hostilities. I think the Chinese are trying to draw a very clear neutral kind of stance so that they can benefit on the other side. I talked about that a little while earlier. Mitch Asdown said, in occupied territory, I mean civilians that live right now in occupied territories, like ways and things to sabotage that will actually make a difference, for instance. Yeah, and again, they can't. They I don't think there's any way that the Russians can keep up against an entire population. It's just too hard. Gary Kilmick just gave me 1999. Holy crap! Thank you so much. That is just so kind of you. I do this in my spare time, trying to, keep attention going. I so greatly appreciate that, Gary. That's very, very kind. Why Ukraine says instead they give it all, it's largely to big charities and the Red Cross. Yeah, so I think part of that is that they trust big charities and the Red Cross, and maybe they don't know the small charities so much. I think that's what's going on. Why Ukraine? We need a database of who's actually doing what. Yeah, I think so, and maybe we should be the ones to build it. But what will change individual Americans' attitudes toward giving directly to strangers? They don't want to give to a scammer, I think, is what's going on here. So building that list is probably a good idea. Carla Corcoran said, Bo of the Fifth Columns channel discussed the problem with bipartisan victory revolution. I don't know much about it. I'm sorry. I should be more plugged into that particular topic. I have to mention the Russia chairing. Wait, hold on. I have to mention Russia chairing the UN Security Council and doing so right on U.S. soil. Well, yeah, that's a problem, but it's a problem that was baked into the nature of the Russians. I did a video 3 days ago maybe, about Lavrov and what he was saying and how the other members didn't let him get away with the nonsense that he was saying. So go back to that video. Tony Wilson says, it's okay to see the bipartisan victory resolution as a good thing, but it doesn't tell the whole story with people like Matt Gaetz. Again, I don't know enough about it to be able to say anything. How do you feel about the pacification of the occupied Eastern Galicia by the Poles in the 30s by Joseph, or perhaps the massacre by the Poles? I am not a scholar of that era. I know it only enough to be dangerous, so I'm going to pass on that particular question just because I can't speak intelligently to it. And when I'm out of my depth, I admit my ignorance. Cheryl says, Ozzy Boga, to complicate the picture with Cossack help, the entire Black Sea coast, Rostov-on-Don and Sochi were part of Ukraine in 1919. In Belgorod. Yeah, so maybe Zelensky should be saying to the 1919 border. That would be actually, because he's talking about the 1991 border. So so say the 1919 border, it'll look almost like he didn't mean to do it, but that would actually send quite a message. Thank you for sharing that. Johnny John says, nice pro-Rus propaganda. Tell us how many Ukrainians died in the UK. Why Ukraine? I'm talking with some small charity groups here in Ukraine about crowdsourcing a database, just as you described. Let's work together on that. Why Ukraine? Let's try to figure that out. Mitch Asdown says, let's pray the weather dies down and much anticipated offensive is wildly successful. Amen. Ozzy says, Cheryl, yes, that's what was after the Hetman sold out to Muscovy and became registered tame Cossacks. The average loss from burglary is $2,000. I don't know where we're going with that. Johnny John says, what nationality was Stalin? Many Americans gave directly to the frontline groups. I often recommend to people. Yeah, and they do. They're just trying to make sure that things are getting where they're trying to go. And I had Orist talking about the charities that he dealt with. I would trust that that's going where it should be going and that kind of thing. Okay, so last few questions, and then we're going to wrap up because we're already at an hour. So Johnny John says, Professor, if followed by a name is in the chat, it means that the person is talking directly at that person. See how much I know. That's why it doesn't make sense to you. Okay, so I know what I'm talking about with leadership and with Ukraine kind of stuff for the most part. If I don't know, I'll tell you, but I didn't even know that. So that's where I am on YouTube. I mean, just okay. So Gary Klilmich says Stalin was Georgian. Okay, I don't know why we're talking about Stalin being Georgian, but if you have any more questions, I'll entertain the next few questions and they'll be done. Thank you for Bowcraft. Hey, John Campbell, you're the one down in, I guess that's down, what is that, Mountainside? Anyway, that's some New Jersey talk. Somebody else was from my hometown in New Jersey, which was kind of cool when we were talking about that last week. That hour went quick. Yeah, it did go quick. I mean, that was a lot of really good ground that we could cover. Paul Young says D-Day, June 6th, as a nod to the U.S. and as June 6th as a nod to the U.S. How old am I? I'm 49. Scotch Plains. That's right, John. You're right. Scotch Plains, not Mountainside. It's close to Mountainside. It's on the way down. Johnny John says, oh, wait, that's not, there's an @ sign there, so I'm not supposed to read that. Eagle Mob says, Professor Gerdes, what's going on with Brazil president regarding Ukraine, Russia, China, and EU NATO relations? Yeah, so the Brazil president is kind of like China in that he's calling for peace. He doesn't want to get involved. He likes being part of the BRICS. He doesn't want to weigh in and support Russia in a meaningful military way, but he's not really a friend or a siding with the West that to say that what Russia's doing is absolutely terrible and shouldn't be. Now, that's a remarkable thing because I would imagine if Argentina had the policy toward Brazil that Russia has toward Ukraine, he'd be shouting it from the rooftops. But, anyway. Gap Ukraine and Poland. Gap says Ukraine and Poland have a fraught history. They absolutely do, but they are now working together and will both benefit from the cooperation and mutual future benefit as Russia's stuck in the imperial mindset. So I dodged that question about the Poles in the past, but the Poles post-Soviet have been going, you know what, we really don't want that, and we don't want that for you, and so they've put the past behind them and have been buddy with Ukraine since. John Earhart, so this thinking is a thinking man's channel. No Russian trolls. Oh no, there are Russian trolls that come out here, and then, by the way, you guys are absolutely awesome. I've watched you over time, and this is a big compliment for me. I've watched you over time, asking them to, when trolls come on and say things, can you please provide evidence of that? Cite your sources. And then when they provide some sort of Russian RT kind of sources, like, no, cite some legitimate sources that we can actually agree on. And you guys are awesome. Do that to the trolls, and they kind of get discouraged and go away. Okay, super stream professor, thank you for all you're doing. Thank you so much. There are trolls everywhere. Cinnamon says, I'm late here, but what's the friction between Chechen forces and Putin and his army? There's a sub-slice of the Chechen forces that are actually fighting with Ukraine. There was an article about that yesterday, I think. Yeah, yesterday. In was it Radio Free Europe? Let me see where that was. DW, no, Guardian. Let's see. I don't remember what it was, but if you just look up, look it up, and you'll find that there is this sub-slice that's working with the Ukraine, and that was really interesting. Eagle Mob, hey, oh, where'd that go? Hey, got it. Thanks, Professor. Johnny Johns is not talking to me, talking to someone else. Thank you for that tip, by the way. That makes this a lot easier. Lars Roans, how can we avoid Russian trolls in the chat? Ask them to prove their points. Ask them to cite their work, and they tend not to do that. Robert Plant says he's sorry you slept in. Well, it's okay. You can watch and review. Sage, thank you for hosting an interesting session. And you giving me pause for thought. I'm glad that worked. Ozzy says, yes, Poland as a nation was very smart to abandon any revisionism. Yes, bravo again, Poland. Yeah, Poland has been big about that kind of thing, because the wars between Ukraine and Poland have been not pretty. A troll, I think, gave me a source the other day, but it was from 1940. Yeah, I got that one too. You really think that the reparations are a good idea? I think the reparations after World War I on Germany, yes, but we have to be careful about how that works. But they have oil through what the reparations need to be is oil and gas revenue. They're sitting on a gas tank, and it will have a positive effect for the entire world as oil prices drop significantly because they're pumping out so much. I think that's the way to work that out. Okay, last thing, Poland and USA are those who are wisest among the allies. I got to give credit to the Baltic states too. The Baltic states have been right there on the cutting edge of that. And with that, I'm going to be one more. Okay, well, no, I'm not. I'm not going to go into any more. I'm going to just stay right there. Okay, thank you guys for your time. Thank you so much. You can go back and review anything that's there. If you have other questions for me, I'll try to answer whatever is within my lane. Thank you. You have a great day, and thank you for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine.